He was just a janitor until they opened his will. Before we begin, ask yourself this. Could you quietly build millions without anyone knowing? If you think it's impossible, this story will change your mind. Hit that like button and subscribe to AI Cash Cortex, where the most unbelievable financial stories come to life. Now, let's step into the quiet world of Ronald Read. Ronald Read wasn't the kind of man you'd notice in a crowd. He walked with a slight hunch. His work boots were always dusty, and he wore the same flannel shirt almost every day. In the sleepy town of Brattleboro, Vermont, Ronald was known as the friendly old janitor who swept floors at the local high school, and before that, pumped gas at a station off Route 5. People liked him. He was polite, humble, quiet, but no one, not a single soul, knew the secret he was carrying. Ronald was born in 1921. The Great Depression left deep scars on his family, and he grew up understanding the value of every penny. His clothes were patched. His toys were handmade. His meals? Simple. He wasn't taught about money in school, but life? Life taught him everything. After serving in World War II, Ronald returned to Brattleboro and took up work at a local gas station. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't pay much, but it was honest work, and Ronald liked that. What people didn't see was what he did after work. He'd go home to a small house filled with dusty books and old newspapers. And while the world around him was busy chasing trends, Ronald was quietly studying something else. Stocks. Not in the flashy way Wall Street brokers did. No. He didn't care about day trading or hot picks. Instead, he focused on companies he believed in: Procter & Gamble, Johnson & Johnson, JP Morgan Chase. Solid. Reliable. Boring, some might say. But to Ronald, these were seeds. He started investing small amounts. $5, then $10, slowly climbing to $50 as years passed. He reinvested every dividend. Every cent mattered. He never sold, never panicked. He simply held. And while everyone else tried to get rich fast, Ronald was quietly getting rich slow. He didn't own a car until he was well into his 40s. He read books from the library. He cut his own firewood in the winter. His idea of splurging was buying a cup of coffee and reading the paper at the local diner. To his neighbors, he was just Ron, the quiet, kind man who never asked for anything. But Ronald was building something, a fortune. By the 1980s, his investments had grown and grown and grown. While the town slept, Ronald's portfolio ballooned into hundreds of thousands, then into the millions. And still, he never told a soul. Even his family didn't know. Even his closest friends assumed he was just barely scraping by. He once parked in a no-parking zone near the library, and instead of paying the $20 ticket, he walked 2 miles home and came back the next day. That was Ronald. Careful, simple, and completely underestimated. Years passed. Ronald eventually retired from his janitor job. He kept reading, kept investing, kept walking to town every day like clockwork, until one winter morning, the town woke up to a quiet announcement in the paper. Ronald Read had passed away in his sleep. There were no big tributes, no TV coverage, just a modest obituary for a modest man. But then something happened. A lawyer arrived in town, carrying a will, and when the contents of that will were revealed, everything changed. The people of Brattleboro had no idea what was coming. Ronald's secret wasn't just shocking. It would rewrite everything they thought they knew about wealth, humility, and legacy. The reading of Ronald Read's will took place in a small, wood-paneled office downtown, the kind of place where modest estates get sorted. But this was no ordinary will. When the executor opened the file, the first thing they saw was the number. $8 million. $8 million. A man who spent decades mopping floors, pumping gas, clipping coupons, had quietly built a portfolio worth more than some CEOs. His entire estate included long-held shares in over 95 blue-chip companies, a tightly organized collection of dividend statements, and a handwritten list of instructions for how to divide it all. Word spread fast. Ronald hadn't just died. He dropped a financial bombshell on Brattleboro. Local news ran the headline: Janitor's hidden fortune leaves Vermont town stunned. Even his family was shocked. His stepchildren admitted they had no idea Ronald was investing at all. They assumed he barely had enough to retire. But the biggest surprise wasn't the amount of money. It was where it was going. Ronald Read could have left it all to relatives, or disappeared into history as a man of mystery. Instead, he did something else. He gave $1.2 million to the local hospital. Not a flashy big city clinic, but the same modest hospital that had cared for him when he had pneumonia in his 60s. Next, he left $4.8 million to Brooks Memorial Library, the place where he'd spent countless hours reading about companies, dividends, and the economy. The same library where he'd once been fined for returning a book late, a fine he insisted on paying. The town was in awe. The money rebuilt hospital wings. It funded scholarships. It transformed the library into a state-of-the-art community hub with new computers, a children's reading garden, and a permanent investing education section named after Ronald. Suddenly, the man who used to sweep high school hallways was the town's most important benefactor. TV stations rolled in. Finance bloggers published think pieces. Ronald's name trended for the first and last time. But underneath all the public admiration, a question still lingered. Why didn't he tell anyone? Why didn't he live a little larger? Why keep it all so secret? That's when the executor handed over a sealed envelope to Ronald's attorney. It was handwritten, a final letter, a message Ronald left behind, not to divide his money, but to explain everything. And no one, not the lawyer, not his family, not the mayor, had seen what was inside. But that was about to change. Inside that envelope was Ronald Read's last message to the world, a letter written in secret, meant for future generations. Imagine leaving behind a letter that could change how people view money, life, and legacy. The envelope was yellowed with age. It was sealed carefully, not with tape, but with a red wax stamp pressed by hand. Written on the front, in neat cursive, to be opened after my death. For those who care to understand. Ronald James Read. The lawyer sliced the seal with a letter opener. Inside, a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds. No signature, no date, just a few pages. The last message of a man who had lived in silence, watched the world from the sidelines, and quietly amassed a fortune. And now, at last, he had something to say. Ronald's letter begins. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I was never good with words, but maybe now you'll finally listen to me. I didn't grow up rich. I didn't have fancy schooling. My parents were mill workers. They didn't leave me money. They left me work ethic. When I was a boy, my father gave me one piece of advice. Son, you don't have to be rich. You just have to stay ready. I didn't know what he meant until much later. When I worked at the gas station, I'd read the newspaper between customers. When I was a janitor, I listened to audiobooks while sweeping floors. I bought my first stock, AT&T, with $20 and a hope it wouldn't disappear. I watched people chase shiny things. I just wanted consistency. So I bought stocks that made things people would always need: toothpaste, cereal, medicine. I didn't sell. I didn't panic. I just held on. For 40 years. If you're wondering why I lived like I did, why I drove an old car and ate oatmeal every morning, it's because I already had what I needed. Not things, but time, peace, a quiet mind. And because I never wanted money to become the reason I stopped being decent. Money doesn't change who you are. It shows who you were all along. I knew people would be shocked when they found out. That's why I didn't tell them. I wanted to remind the world. You don't need to be a genius. You don't need 1 million followers. You just need discipline, patience, and a little faith. When the letter was read aloud at the memorial event the town organized in his honor, no one moved. Not a cough. Not a phone screen. Not even a whisper. The quietest man they'd ever known had left behind the loudest message. One that made people think twice about their habits, their goals, and the way they measure success. That week, a dozen teens opened their first brokerage accounts. Parents brought their kids to the library Ronald saved. Local businesses framed the article about him near their front doors. His impact didn't end with money. It became a movement. Financial blogs called it the Read Effect. College professors added his story to their lectures. And generations of working-class Americans finally had a role model who looked just like them. Not flashy, not famous, just a janitor who beat the system by being patient. Ronald's final words. If you made it this far, thank you. My story isn't special. Anyone could have done what I did. I just did it long enough for it to work. Now go make your story. But don't wait. Time's the only thing you can't buy back. Ronald Read may have swept floors for a living, but he left behind a legacy that'll outlive most billionaires. His story proves you don't need fame or flash to change the world. Just time, patience, and a reason. If this story inspired you, subscribe to AI Cash Cortex for more real stories that teach, move, and motivate. And remember, you don't need to be born wealthy to die with impact.